kiss for you.
All right, so Apple's WWDC event was yesterday, and among other things that they did, we have a lot to kind of discuss relating to their new liquid glass approach. This is from the Apple developers video, and it kind of just talks about liquid glass, the design of it, the kind of intent behind it, and all that. To be honest, the reason I'm calling this a very stupid idea is it is not something that is, while it's visually coherent in terms of like a design language, it is not understanding of, I don't know, any design principles just across the board. And kind of what I mean by that is I have a couple of examples here. So as you can see here, if you are not aware of what the current Apple Music UI looks like, the current UI is, pretty basic relatively. You got things at the bottom. It's sort of Spotify-like. So yeah, it is, you have your basic library for you, browse, audio or radio, and search. At the bottom, in a stagnant bar, you have whatever your music is, play, pause, do all that. Your buttons here for connected devices, shuffle, loop, descriptions, plus and down volume, right? Yeah, pretty standard. Spotify is something pretty similar to that. All right, now let's take a look at the new one. They have moved all these things into this transparent thing at the bottom here. But as you can probably tell from this top thing here, it's kind of hard to see that name nail, right? It's kind of hard to see that gray behind the transparent glass behind the picture, behind this other picture. Like, it's kind of hard to see this thing here. If I wasn't pointing it out, you probably couldn't tell what the name of the artist is. The artwork is also very small and kind of hard to tell because it is also encased in this glass. These disappear when you're not using them, so if you want to ever get back to it, you have to scroll down. So this is just one example where things, as you can see, are not easily identifiable. The time, their new time thing, where they're stretching and morphing the time to be sort of similar to what your lock screen is. These aren't like screenshots I've like scoured through. These are like directly on the page of like when you look at look at promotional images of Apple's liquid glass. These are just like, go to images and you'll find these. Right? Like, that's the music one, that's the time one, there's another one here. Like, these are just on the standard promotional images that they're using to promote the thing. And you have bad decisions like this, where it's like this, the liquefy thing is making it harder to see that this is a 9, right? And that this is a 4, because it kind of disappears. This corner here kind of disappears to make this like weird looking 4, and these things are inherently going to be different. That's going to be orange, that's going to be no orange. It's like, it's not a very consistent language. It's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be more, adaptive to what you're doing, but this is on the promotional site, and this isn't good because it's hard to identify what this is. Obviously it's 941, but to me, I looks 9, okay, makes sense. I see 1, looks good. 4 looks a little weird because, and maybe it's just the compression or whatever, if you couldn't tell here, that's a white leaf in the background and blending into this white thing on the side here. And maybe if you're in person and seeing it in a brighter display or one that maybe has that parallax thing, it's not as a problem. But right now, this is a little confusing. I can tell what it is, but I can't easily identify what it is on first glance with this thing, because in this case, this image here has whiter elements in the background that are kind of blurring into the number here. Again, a promotional image. So we have this one where it's hard to see the name, and it's going to be harder to see these elements here once you continue scrolling. You have this one that kind of blends in with the background a lot of the time. And then you have the camera, and what they decided to do with the camera is they simplified it. And let's see if I can get a better image of the camera app. So the camera app here is just 2 things: video, photo, record button, your switch, and then at the top, it's your change and your other settings. All right, how do you access live video? How do you access the other modes? How do you access editing features? Before, these would just be readily available. You would just click on each of those options and they'd give it to you. Now, instead, what you have to do is swipe up from the bottom of the photos or video thing, and you'll get this menu here: flash, aperture, timer, exposure, styles, aspect. So, and live video, this is for video, I believe, but live should also be here as well. right? You want to access the flash. It's no longer in an easy to understand location where it used to be. You just have the top bar that says flash. You have to swipe up from the bottom here to access this menu where you can adjust the flash or adjust the time or add style or change exposure or change the aspect ratio, right? Another example, how do you access the other video modes? You can see on this menu here, there's no other video modes. You know, there's not panoramic or wide shot or slow-mo or anything. How do you access those? You have to swipe along the side. It's not even showing this one. You swipe along the side and they'll just appear magically. It'll be like, hey, you have access to cinematic mode now or portrait mode or anything like that. It's hidden by default, and I don't believe there's any way to make it not hidden, right? I think this is just how it's going to look. You have to swipe to access the stuff. If you want to access things like, again, timers or flash, swipe up from the bottom. That is different, reminder, than accessing frame rate. So instead of having everything either just be in this menu here, you access the other modes by swiping left or right. You access that stuff by going up. You access, frame rate and resolution by clicking this thing in the left corner. And then you access your other settings, like editing things, in the top right. Does that sound simpler? Does it sound simpler than it used to just be a bar where you could access timer and flash and live video and the resolution and frame rate stuff, and then at the bottom you had these other things, and you didn't have to swipe up to access these timer and stuff? They would just be at the top with the other settings, but because you need to see the top little bit here of the camera for no reason, they decided to move it into a menu that's invisible. So that's just an example of like hard to see, kind of blends in, horrible design with quote-unquote intuitive controls. You're just getting stuff. Here's one last one. This is, sorry, it's a little bit blurry. This is the new Safari. So instead of having a consistent either top or bottom bar with the stuff, once again, you have to click on either this icon in the left or this icon in the right, and it will bring up this little menu that has like new tab. So instead of just clicking a button like every other browser where it's just new tab, either in the actual search bar, right? Like in the top here, either just clicking something like that for new tab, or what Google does where you open effectively your window manager. Let's see if I can do Google Chrome Android. You do the manager. Are they going to show it? No, no one shows it. This thing, right? You click your little 7 or however many, 1, 7, whatever that is, and then it brings up a window manager, and then you can add windows from that. And what it comes down to is this. I'm using Windows 11 like most people, and while I did review Windows 11 and kind of had a favorable opinion of it, Windows 11 to me, when I'm watching the Apple event, is kind of what that liquid glass stuff reminded me of. It reminded me of the new design language of Windows and this kind of format and the way that all these things kind of circle around and how it kind of modernizes a lot of the things that you would want from a platform and supposedly got rid of a lot of the clutter. And that was the objective of Windows 11. To varying degrees of success. What you can say a lot of things about Windows 11, but to me, what you can't say is the consistency of the software. And you may say, well, obviously, but well, look at the other options, right? This is the launch of Windows 11 from when it came 3 or 4 years ago. It is virtually identical to what you have here, almost completely, except for this side panel here that you can just hide, whoops, or not. Relatively everything else here, from how this pops up to the things in the middle, the search bar is expanded, but most things, there's a Copilot button here. But if you were to show someone Windows 11 from, 2021, and then you were to show them Windows 11 now, they're pretty identical. And you may say, well, of course they are, but no, that really is important, because if you go back to what macOS, whenever they redesigned it from Finder being square to Finder being rounded, right? I think it was macOS 12. I think they're on macOS 16 now. 16. Are we on macOS 16? Are we on macOS 15? 15 Sequoia, and then 16 is the new redesign, right? So I think it was in 12 or 11, Big Sur. It might have been Big Sur because I'm seeing this. Okay, yeah. So it looks like Big Sur macOS 11 is when they had the big redesign. That's a big redesign, right? That's a fundamental shift. This is a good image. It's a fundamental shift in how everything operates. The old design, right? Flat icons in here, and how this sort of works. And then you get the more rounded aspects of Big Sur. You see rounded, smaller icons, different iconography. They changed the settings completely to be more iOS-like. They changed the top corner here this top corner to be like a control panel with Wi-Fi and everything and display up and down, right? And they fixed that. They also added a little color to the bottom here, fixed the icons here, changed settings, as I said. So that's a really large redesign. And ever since then, they've kind of been iterating on that stuff and, for example, added things like Stage Manager. That is, I believe, off by default. Yeah, Stage Manager off by default, but it is a very large change to how the operating system works. It is this thing where you can shift windows to the side here and multitask, and this little thing. I believe you have to activate it, but that is a fundamental shift in how you interact with a major part of macOS, which is window management. Stage Manager having this sort of activation and how you activate it and how you're able to use it and how you combine it is a large change. Windows doesn't really have that. The biggest thing Windows 11 changed from 4 years ago to now is the Copilot button. Meanwhile, as I mentioned, in the last 4 years, we had Big Sur that redesigned, we had the Stage Manager redesign, we had the new shift to like all the Apple silicon, so stuff to take advantage of that, and then obviously the AI shift as well. We had computer shifts in terms of like the redesign of the laptop with the notch here and what that led you to do. So macOS has a lot of things that it redesigns on a pretty consistent basis for general interaction and usability. Windows does not. And so if you were trying to, figure out what to use, and you were someone that is, not necessarily someone that's super, adept at computers, you'd probably pick the thing that's not going to change every single year. We want to pick the thing that's consistent and you understand it year to year. That's why Windows remains so popular. What you get with this liquid glass stuff is a whole lot of the direct opposite of that. This is not similar to macOS where you're adding some, technical features. This is a fundamental redesign of how basic things are achieved in the system, right? Basic functionality like flash and styles and aspect ratio being hidden behind a swipe up on the camera roll. Basic readability in terms of how time works. The basic functionality of being able to read names and use a music app are things that are changing as part of this. And to me, as someone that has used both macOS and Windows and iOS and Android and all these things, I don't like this approach. I would much rather have a Windows style or a more modern Android style that is more focused on adding functionality over time rather than complete redesigns like this, because I don't think this is actually a very good or beneficial redesign. It looks cool, it looks nice in photos, it has that kind of edge stuff, and Apple knows how to do normal redesigns. Case in point, the dynamic island was a pretty good redesign, right? It changed from the kind of notch style that you had before, and it was the dynamic thing that was allowing you to shift between battery and recording and calls and maps and all that, and it was a pretty interesting option there. That is a good redesign because it takes something that you are familiar with and, while not removing any factors, makes it a little bit more dynamic. And I think it's pretty easy to understand. You could still have the cameras, they're still there, but now it's going to do more things. And it's not like it adds any more complexity. It's still taking up relatively the same amount of space, but now it's just where your notifications would typically be anyway. So I think, for me, this kind of redesign works very well. Apple knows how to do these kind of things. They do them with their Macs when they redesign those. And yet, when it comes to their software, as you've seen, they add things that a lot of people don't understand. Before this, for iPad, as an example, they did not... what was the iPad OS launch? When they switched from using iOS to iPad OS... no, just like iPad launch. 2019. Quite a bit ago. They redesigned it fundamentally to be an iPad-specific operating system. And then they didn't do anything with that other than add some very confusing multi-gestural, multi-window, multitasking stuff. Until very recently, as of the 26 here, they're finally letting you actually be able to use iPads like a computer with multi-window management and actual file management and stuff, and not just pretend file management, actual normal macOS style file management. That's a good thing. That's a redesign that is beneficial for a lot of people and will help a lot of people's iPads in their functionality. And then you go back to liquid glass and you're like, okay, so it's not an iPad level redesign of you're actually changing things that matter to the people that are using the device. It's not a macOS redesign where you're just cleaning things up. It is a dramatic shift, like they said, from iOS 6 to iOS 7. It's a dramatic, fundamental reorganization of how you use your phone. And you may say, oh, well, it's just, a lot of visual stuff. They would not make a developer specific video series if it was just going to be visual stuff. Because a lot of the time, most developers don't really care about visual stuff. Obviously, they care about the UI of their own apps, but the actual functionality of how Apple does things is usually not that important. Well, when you have things like human interface guidelines and guidelines for materials and creating icons and stuff, it starts to become a pretty big deal because it shifts the attention away from just, hey, it's a new redesign of things that we'd like to do, to you are going to be using this to create your apps from now on. This design language, this medium, this thing, you're going to most likely anyway need to support it. Because, and finally here, if there's one thing that people get very annoyed at, it is apps that do not mesh well with the current app functionality of your phone. And kind of what I mean by that is apps that you download and are using and they feel like they haven't been updated in 30 years, right? The ones that are like, oh, you have all these apps with all this modern design language, and then you have that one app that's like part of some electrical company you use, or maybe it's like a Philips app or something that hasn't been updated in 10 years, and it looks really old and doesn't, function very well. It's that kind of thing. It's that really big feeling of disconnect between all the modern, liquid glass options, and then the old one where it's like, ew, what is that? And it looks hideous, right? These kind of things. That is really what I'm saying, is people don't like to open one app and have it look, quote, modern, and then open another app and have it look ugly and weird and feel like it's from a different era, right? And obviously that's not something everyone cares about, but enough people are going to be caring about that it's going to shift the development of things to be more like liquid glass. And I think that's really stupid. And I know that that's something developers are going to be doing, because that's every time that something like this happens, that's where they go to. They go to modernizing Apple stuff because that is a large part of the market. So you're going to see a lot of apps spending a lot of money and resources adapting this liquid glass aesthetic, especially considering they promote on their developer page the fact that that's what's going to be happening. And I think that's a very bad decision because, as I hope I've been able to point out, all of the inconsistencies and abnormalities that this current version, at least, of the implementation is using. So hopefully that was interesting. Hopefully you kind of found something about that, whether it be my insight into why I don't believe this Apple Glass thing is working, or how it's affecting other things like macOS and iPadOS. So if you enjoy this stuff and want to see more of this kind of thing on the channel, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, do all that, and I'll see everyone in the next video.